I think we've mentioned Professor Piombino, who's seated here, because now we need to transition to the last segment of this seminar, where, if you remember, based on my presentation, we wanted to explore the diversity and sensory identity of these white wines. Originally, there were 2 papers for this segment, but then, as I was telling you, Professor Parpinello will not be able to attend because of the bad conditions, bad weather conditions in Emilia-Romagna and the catastrophes that caused. So, Professor Piombino, you have the task of taking care of the assumptions we've put forth so far. Okay, we'll try to do that and also take care of the natural selection that has been at play today in our audience. Okay, Professor Piombino will discuss the sensory identity of Italian white wines. Thank you very much for being here, still here. I will not list again the wines, the 18 varietals that we analyzed and the goals of the sensory study. Well, actually, I will review the goals. First of all, it will be to come up with a vocabulary that is specific for these 18 varietals. This vocabulary should be meant to describe the 18 varietals and discriminate the 18 varietals from a sensory perspective in order to identify sensory variables and elements that would highlight the diversity and the peculiarities of these 18 varietals. Now, we did this in the form of a pretty conventional sensory study with a descriptive analysis, quantitative and qualitative analysis that was pretty intense because the 12 judges, 12 panelists for this sensory study, after participating in as many as 10 training sessions that I'll describe soon, went through 41 sessions with a total of 492 wine samples, so 246 wines times 2 replicas, 2 replicates. The experiment design was fully randomized and intra-varietal. Wines could belong to just any varietal. And this was a very important aspect. And we also used black glasses so that the differences in color could not influence, could not create biases based on the color. We tried to use a scale that would also describe small differences. Now, the training was meant to teach the judges how to describe familiarizing with this specific methodology. Now, 16 other families were defined with all the physical standards of these 72 descriptors were defined. And this was used with the judges to train them to recognize the wines. So a huge work in terms of training, not just olfactory training, but also gustatory training. We instructed the judges to also recognize and discriminate the tastes and mouthfeel standards. Here you see the experimental design, and it's very, very robust. Let's move on to the results. The initial goal was to create a sensory vocabulary. What's a sensory vocabulary? A number of descriptors that are essential and non-redundant to describe and discriminate 18 varietals. So we identified 29 descriptors by applying an ANOVA analysis, a robust ANOVA, because we also considered that the interactions possible interactions between the judge and the wine. So if a judge felt that a given descriptor should be assessed differently than the others, depending on the product, the background noise should be ruled out. So the excess of variability was ruled out by defining these 29 descriptors, which were our vocabulary, the olfactory vocabulary for the description and discrimination of these 18 varietals, at least on the set of samples that we analyzed that were tasted. We did the same also for the gustatory descriptors and the mouthfeel descriptors. Now, we started out actually with 72 initial descriptors for the odorous part, so we funneled the scale and we trained the panelists to use these standards that were not chosen at random, but we studied the references, but also the popularization websites that are set up by wine promotion consortia, the scientific literature, and again, we funneled the 72 descriptors and distilled them to a list of 29, a short list of 29. Now, the other ones that you see on the bottom of the slide are needed to describe diversity in gustatory terms as well as mouthfeel terms. And also, we preserved the descriptor tingling, tingling being associated to SO2. How to read these charts? As the bar becomes taller, it means that the discriminant power of that descriptor diminishes. So the lower the bar, the more powerful the descriptor in the description of the samples. Now this slide addresses the gustatory and mouthfeel description and discrimination. Essentially, one by one, without going to the details, this should be read like this. Everything that is in blue is a descriptor, and you find the descriptor at the bottom, which is on average higher in that wine or more perceivable in that wine compared to the average of the rest of the wines. Whatever is in red is the opposite. So the average Gewürztraminer, when it comes to acidity, is significantly lower than all the other wines. So once again, everything that is not there also becomes a marker from a sensory perspective. So there are several wines that have discriminant markers in terms of oral sensations, both positively and negatively because of their presence or absence, and others that have no discriminants. This means that thinking of the potential sensory characteristics of recognizability of a wine obtained from a specific varietal, you cannot count the gustatory characteristics, the oral sensations. Now, moving on to the results that pertain to the odorous characteristics, we have created a hierarchy of among the clusters to see if there were any correlations and similarities between the various odorous descriptors or olfactory descriptors. We have identified essentially 3 olfactory dimensions for the 18 varietals. Now, the first grouping included all the descriptors associated with the toasting, the nuts, the lactic odors, the spicy odors, the wood and others, the smokiness, all others that are not fresh, not fruity, not floral, but also dehydrated fruit. In this subgroup, you also have descriptors that are more associated with flaws, early flaws, and signs of premature aging. Then we identified another group, the sweet floral group, because it encompasses floral descriptors as well as vanilla and mango. And then there's a pretty rich group that will go from fruity to tropical fruit, so fruit in various definitions, but also thiolic notes, passion fruit, a box tree, balsamic, aromatic herbs or pot herbs. And this is the third olfactory dimension, which based on our results, the three groupings can describe the 18 varietals. We've then tried to plot these dimensions in space to see which wines would be part of which dimension. Here we get a number of indications. The groupings that were underscored via our hierarchic analysis of the clusters will correspond to 3 dimensions in this PCA. Now, if you look at the wines in detail, their positioning on the chart sort of defines a sensory or sensorial space where, from an odorous and olfactory perspective, the various varieties will find their own position. On the edges of at the extremes of the space, you have Müller-Thurgau, Gewürztraminer, and Albana, which somehow compress the diversity of all the other wines towards the center of the chart. And for this reason, we ended up eliminating the 2 most extreme wines, Müller and Gewürz, so as to have a broader perspective onto the diversity of all the other varietals, which are essentially neutral. Now, in this way, we managed to visualize more effectively the various varietals in the 3 different olfactory dimensions that we have discussed so far. The fruity one, the floral one, and the toasty one. We then tried to extract some sort of description and identity, at least for the varietal wines that provided a better discrimination. How did we do that? Well, of course, we took this chart of the coefficients and the averages, and again, everything that's in blue means that on average it is significantly more intense and more prominent for that wine compared to the others, while the red bars indicate the opposite. In this way, we identified what was significantly more important in this case as a model for Gewürztraminer, both positively and negatively. So Gewürztraminer has a rose odor that is particularly perceivable. It is floral, but it also has mango and vanilla notes as well as notes of tropical fruit. Okay, but it is not fruity, not mineral, It does not show any off odors. It's varietal, so it's harder to perceive any off odors. And it does not have any citrus fruit notes. So it was described positively and negatively because of what it has and what it hasn't. And then we did something else. We tested the gustatory descriptors and the odorous descriptors to test them for their discriminating power. This chart shows that the most significant, the ones that really can discriminate below our confidence threshold, below the P below 0.05, that does not allow discrimination, maybe a character that is present in Gewürztraminer without a discriminating effect, whether positively or negatively. So we merged this information, the information contained in both charts that were obtained from a model that was based on an ANOVA, but a robust one that was also factoring in the interactions to obtain this wheel. At least in the case of our wine set, the sensory wheel of Gewürztraminer, which is made up of a component associated with the nose sensations and another portion that describes the oral sensations. So we can say that Gewürztraminer has a strong floral character, and in particular we have a hierarchy. The cursor appears and disappears all the time, but on the nose it's very floral, and the slice that the floral characters is larger than that of the other descriptors, and in particular there's a very clear-cut note of roses. In my presentation I will not show the correlations with the chemical data because I don't want to disclose something that is beautiful and that we are working on at present. But I would like to refer to what my colleagues said about terpenes and the rose sensations that are much more concentrated in Gewürztraminer, so it is sensorially active. And then all the terpenes here that are associated with the sensations of orange blossom, but also tropical fruit and mango. And then the sweet notes of vanilla. From a gustatory standpoint, it is sweet, but also characterized by increased viscosity. And so that makes us go back to the idea that Gewürztraminer had the highest residual sugar among all wines. That's why it is so viscous, so thick. We did the same using the same data with other wines. Certainly the three that I have showed to you at the extremes of the sensory space, the three wines that were defining the sensory space within which all the other wines were found. And so here's the sensorial wheel of Müller-Thurgau. In this case, as I've tried to anticipate, it's a wheel that only includes odorous descriptors. This doesn't mean that Müller does not have any gustatory characteristics, but that the characteristics will not help discriminate Müller compared to the other wines that we have analyzed. So this means that the varietal recognition of Müller based on these results is largely based on the olfactory characters, while Gewürztraminer is based not only on the olfactory characters but also on the gustatory factors. So you see a clear-cut thiolic note, the varietal thiols that were found in such high concentrations, mercaptopentanone, mercaptohexanol, in the chemical analysis become sensorially active as it was expected. There's a mineral note and some vegetal note and pot herbs and citric notes, especially grapefruit, and then tropical notes, passion fruit especially. So it's a fruity thiol. And then Albana, which was at the other extreme of the sensorial, of the sensory space. And also, we also tried to color code the differences. The Albana wine, in this case, can be described through nose sensations and mouth-related sensations. To the palate, it's not really astringent, but it is dry and bitter. On the nose, it offers all these sensations of dehydrated fruit, of seeds, spice, woody, toasted, smoked, ethereal, and lactic. So these are the olfactory wheels of the three angles of the triangle. When I showed the other varietals, expanded Lugana was at an extreme compared to Falangina, and so based on the same criterion, we managed to obtain a sensory wheel for Lugana and Falangina as well. So here you only have a bouquet that becomes a discriminant, thiols, pot herbs, vegetal and mineral. Falangina is particularly fruity at the other extreme, fruitier than the rest of the samples, also distinguished through its nose, but with important floral and tropical notes. Now, the nice thing was that using this model, we tried to compare them. So when comparing the different wines, you can group them by similarity or similarities based on certain odorous descriptors. For instance, you have Müller-Thurgau, which is at the extreme of our olfactory space. You also have Lugana and Verdicchio. The three have this mineral note in common. If you think of the data that my colleagues showed, these were the three wines that stood out because of their significantly higher concentration of mercaptohexanol, which in the literature has already been correlated with mineral notes. So this is one aspect that describes three wines that can certainly be defined as mineral. This is the second dimension, which we might define as being more fruity or floral. Gewürztraminer, our model, which is more floral. Falangina, which is floral and fruity. Then Greco di Tufo, which is a fruity wine with sweet odors of vanilla, and that requires many gustatory descriptors to be properly described, such as sapidity and acidity. And then you have Vermentino, which associates floral notes, combines floral notes, also with pot herbs, dehydrated fruit, undergrowth, and bitterness. The third dimension that was more slanted towards the Albana also included Nosiola and Palagrello with similar gustatory and olfactory characterizations. So we've created some sort of model, initial reference model, that can be validated as it was the case with Müller-Thurgau. Also, it could be integrated with samples from different vintages if this all is confirmed. As for the other varietals we considered, but for which we did not develop a wheel, well, we didn't because simply these varietals, which are indicated here, such as Cortese and Vernaccia, are both characterized by balsamic aromas, while Pinot Gris and Garganega are both characterized by citric or citrus fruit descriptors. They don't have, in general, many descriptors that are discriminating. So That means that on average, the odorous intensity of the various descriptors will not be differentiated significantly from the other elements. So in order to better understand from a sensory perspective these wines, it is necessary to sample more of them to make this model more stable and more understandable. So in conclusion, we have defined an olfactory and gustatory vocabulary, at least for this set of wines, which we hope is representative. It can describe the diversity of Italian white wines that we have investigated. We have identified 29 odorous descriptors and 7 descriptors that apply to taste and mouthfeel. We have defined the sensory space of these 18 wines, identifying the most important the main 3 olfactory dimensions. As part of that space, we've described the diversity of each wine. We created sensory identity models in the form of sensory or sensorial wheels. And going back to what Fulvio said this morning, we have lots of data on many of these varietals, but never in a systematic study have they been studied using the same methodology for all varietals to make data comparable. And so we might consider this as a model, both in terms of description and in terms of discriminating capacity. In terms of descriptors that are there or that are not there. And then in the future, we will study the correlation to chemical data. This is underway. And also we will validate the sensory identity models, and we will delve deeper into the models that we couldn't fully develop because they did not appear to be easy to discriminate based on our data. I would like to thank you for listening so attentively, and I would like to thank the entire group of wines researchers that I've had the pleasure to work with. Thank you very much. So these are the very last minutes, and I think we've exceeded the time allotted for this presentation. Let's anyway look at the questions. Okay. Colors. Of course. Now, there's a question. Could you please explain again how you obtain the discrimination of the significant descriptors to be used to truly analyze the wines?
Vocabolario e poi dei descrittori.
Abbiamo raccolto tutti i dati.
Now, we collected all the data and carried out a very, very basic analysis of the variance. A normal variance analysis using a model that would, a rigorous model, that would not only consider the aggregated data in the form of the average and the value of the intensity that had been measured for individual descriptors, but we also considered also the background noise due to the 2 repetitions. We tested the repeatability of the judges. We tested the inter-judge repeatability and only considered the most robust data. This is nothing but a variance analysis with a very rigorous model. And in this way, we were able to funnel down the number of descriptors from 72 to 29 for odorous descriptors. Thank you very much. I see no more questions, so perhaps that's the very last part of the presentation. Let me just say that to summarize all we've done, I mean, it was really difficult to work with these neutral wines. So you have to have super performing analytical methodologies, and as you have seen, you really have to explore several analytical dimensions, both from a sensory point of view and from a chemical perspective. This is a characteristic of wines obtained from non-aromatic grapes. We've seen that Gewürztraminer is easy to identify. It is well characterized and easy to define. Outside of that perimeter, all the characteristics will overlap across different wines, and integrating progressively all these data, and there's a lot of work still going on. We will see the diversity of Italian wines that are scattered throughout the country. But there's an identity, an element that can identify each terroir with a number of factors that will be more or less evident that will contribute to the specificity of each product. So in the end, perhaps in certain cases, we were frustrated by the non-immediate evidence of the differences that we were seeing, but as we were improving our data analysis methodologies, we could describe these elements better and better, and are still doing that. So we would like to create an atlas of the aromatic profiles of Italian wines, and it seems to be doable. If Gianni invites us in 2 years, perhaps we might have sufficient data to present. So as to close this entire story, thank you for being here until the very last moment. It was a long marathon. Few people are still here, not too few.